We all come to spiritual practice because we're trying to escape something. There's something going on that we don't like. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe you worry a lot. Maybe you're afraid of something. Maybe you procrastinate. Maybe you know you're not living up to your potential. Maybe you have difficulty in relationships. Maybe you have difficulty with yourself. Maybe you don't like yourself very much. Maybe you engage in self-destructive behavior. My main problem was stress. I was stressed out a lot. I was working as a professional musician. I played the drums for 25 years. Played with all kinds of different artists, and all of those artists had different needs. So I would be learning different material throughout the week. I would be traveling lots of miles, often on the weekend, but often midweek too. Unsociable hours were the norm, and I would have no idea how much money I was going to earn from one month to the next. So I got stressed. I didn't know how to deal with these things. Didn't know how to deal with myself. I was dealing with some social anxiety as well. All kinds of bad habits that I'd picked up through childhood and my teenage years. Fear of intimacy, which I've spoken about in another video. But I really wanted to figure out a way to deal with my stress. And we all know, don't we, friends, about the monks and how they supposedly live this happy, stress-free life. I didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went at that time in my life. It was approaching the age of 30 when I was really looking to solve this problem. I'm now 37. But immediately I was overwhelmed with the number of options that are out there for spiritual teachings to read and listen to, and spiritual practices to take up. There were so many. And the biggest problem that I found with this was that a lot of the practices, a lot of the teachings that I was encountering were recommending that they and they alone were the answer. So I'd read a book from the Zen tradition and it would say, you have to sit like this, you have to practice like this, you have to read this kind of teaching and none others. This is the way. Don't be looking at any other ways to do things. And I'm thinking, well, I've already seen other ways to do things. So am I fucked? Is the game already over? Then I'd go and read something from a Theravada teacher that said practically the same thing. This is the way. You got to do it like this, or you're in trouble. Then I'd read something from some other tradition, some other tradition, some other tradition. All of them very convicted. All of them with teachers representing them who were very convicted. This is the way to solve your problem. This is the way to practice spirituality. Come and listen to me. If you don't, you're basically fucked. At least this was how I interpreted it. I can't guarantee, of course, that that was what the teacher meant in each case. But I read a lot of language that, at the very least, suggested that there was one way to do things. Now, over time, I gained context for this, and I realized we're in a very different context to that in which these teachings were recorded. When a lot of these teachings were written down, the world was a lot larger, meaning boundaries between nations were harder to cross. Each individual culture was more self-contained. And what that meant in terms of spiritual practice, what that meant for the truth seeker, was that they would typically enter into one system of wisdom, and that's where they would stay for the rest of their lives. And I started to long for this at one point. I started to wish that I'd never heard about all of these different traditions with their different ways of doing things. I started to wish that it wasn't on me to decide which teaching to follow, which practice to do, but rather that someone could just tell me, which to the best of my knowledge is basically how this stuff has gone for the past couple thousand years and longer before that. I tend to use the time of the Buddha as a beginning reference point, but actually people were practicing spirituality for thousands of years before that. And typically there would be the wisest person in their local area, and that's who they would go to for teachings. Maybe that wise teacher would have some teachers beneath them. Teachings would be available, and that would be that. If you grew up in a Buddhist country, you were Buddhist. If you grew up in a Christian country, you were Christian. And like I say, I kind of longed for this. There's a simplicity to it. Someone just tells you, this is how it is, and you just follow the process. Sounds great, right? We don't have to deal with that headache of trying to decide which teaching and practice to follow. But then I started to think, well, hold on though. What if the guy who was supposedly the most wise in your local area wasn't really that wise? Certainly, I never really felt like I was getting any real wisdom when I went to church as a boy growing up in England. It was really just rules. I was always drawn to wisdom, but I wasn't drawn to what was going on in the churches that I visited. This is not to say that there's no wisdom in Christianity. That would be a ridiculous claim. There absolutely is wisdom in Christianity. But I hadn't found it, and it seemed to me difficult to find in my own culture. And that's why I ended up, first of all, working with a Theravada Buddhist teacher who had some flexibility. He was switched on enough to know that there were different presentations of wisdom and that we must at least acknowledge those. Now, the advantage of things being more open here in 2024 is that we each get to choose, and yes, that has its cost, but it means we can really go for the most direct, most effective wisdom. We just have to put up with the process that we each have to go to for finding it, for verifying it in our own experience. The Buddha always said, hey, don't listen to what I tell you, don't take my word for it, but confirm what I say in your direct experience. Well, how much harder is this to do when you're trying to confirm not only the Buddha's teaching, but the teaching of many Buddhist teachers who came after him, the Taoist teachers, the Advaita Vedanta teachers, and any other presentation of wisdom in which you're interested. It was always the non-dual wisdom for me that seemed to have the ring of truth. So that was the direction that I went in. Still, I ended up doing long years of comparison of these teachings. I became almost paranoid at one time. Which of these teachings is right? Which one is right? They can't all be right. If they're saying this is the one way, well, which one is the one way? That was the question that was really burning a hole in my skull for at least a year. Resolution came when I ceased comparing the differences between these teachings and looked instead at their commonalities. I asked myself, sure, in the context that these teachings were written down, these old teachings, there was a lot of crazy shit happening, you know? People were still sacrificing goats, humans in some cases. So, of course, someone who has real wisdom, when they rock up to that village where animals or even people are being slaughtered because people think that's going to make it rain, then of course the person who rolls up with real wisdom is going to say, hey, stop what you're doing and listen to this. This is the way. Right? So you hear how important context is here? And indeed, then, could it be that various teachers in different cultures at different times may have realized the same truth, but put it in different language? Absolutely possible. So I started to look at the commonalities among these teachings, and I found that indeed there were some common truths. Truths like the present moment is the only moment. Truths like your worries, your anxieties, your guilt, your shame is fabricated in the mind. Truths like all of your thoughts and feelings are transient, temporary. They never last. Truths like your true nature is awareness. The appearance of the body comes and goes. The sensations of the body come and go. Your thoughts, your feelings. The experience of a mind comes and goes. And all of the best teachings that I came across placed great importance on the practitioner's direct experience. So it was on me to verify what I was learning in my own experience, not just from what I was reading and listening to, but from that first teacher who I spent hundreds of hours speaking with, and then from subsequent teachers who I hung out with as well. It was on me to test this to see, does it really work? Which of course was the Buddha's original recommendation. Does this work for me to dissolve that stress that I'm trying to dissolve? Does this work for me to bring about greater effectiveness in life? Does this work to bring me to that contentment, that baseline happiness that never wavers, that all of these teachings talk about? And I found that yes, once I focused on these common ingredients among these teachings, keeping it very simple, then yes, it worked. Now, where does this leave you, friend? I strongly suspect you've encountered many different teachings already, and you come to this video and you're thinking, what now? Many, many times I would come across a new teacher on YouTube or wherever else and think, oh, I kind of like what this person's saying. Does that mean I have to ditch all my other teachers? And I discovered in the end, no. That's not what it means at all. Because any genuine wisdom teaching understands inclusiveness. We're not here to exclude anything. By means of wisdom, you yourself will come to discern, will come to know what is wise and what is not wise. But my position here as someone who teaches this stuff in 2024 is that it's not my job to tell you what is wise and what's not wise. I'd rather you see for yourself. Now, I may speak in terms sometimes of what's wise and what's not wise. But even if I tell you, you have to decide whether or not you believe me. So it always comes down to you. You have to decide which teachers to listen to, you have to decide which practices to do, and you have to decide which of them work for you. So every practitioner here in the 21st century must synthesize their own path out of the various teachings that are available, the various practices that are available. This is what I did. I spent time with many great teachers through recordings, writings, and actual conversation. And I synthesized my own path. And the beauty of this is that it meant I had to go deep. I couldn't, excuse me, I couldn't just follow what someone else was prescribing. I couldn't. Teachers tried to make me do that, but I couldn't deny the validity of the wisdom that I was hearing elsewhere. So for me, I had to cross-reference all of the different teachings that I was learning. And then it went even further than spiritual teachings. There is wisdom in self-help material. There's wisdom among high-performing entrepreneurs. There's wisdom among celebrated athletes. A dear friend of mine once said, "There's no monopoly on wisdom." I'm not sure if he'd heard that quote elsewhere, but he didn't attribute it to anyone. Sounds like something that would be well known. There's no monopoly on wisdom. Wisdom can come from anywhere. So it is up to us, friends. It's up to you to synthesize your own path from the wisdom that's available to you. Now, I'd like to give you something actionable here so that you can actually get started on this, or just think about your ongoing process in a more structured way. It's very, very simple. I call this the 3-step inner guru method. Very, very simple. And you may well benefit from journaling these 3 steps, using them as prompts, if you like. Really, it would be 2 prompts. Because writing forces your thoughts into order. But if you're able to do this thinking without writing, then by all means, you can just treat this as a mental exercise. Step 1 is to simply contemplate the question, what do you need? What do you need? Is it stress that you're trying to solve, like I was? Is it procrastination? Is it laziness? Is it a lack of purpose? Is it fear? Is it social anxiety? Is it depression? Could be any number of the problems that ail us as human beings. What do you need? And indeed, it could be several of those. You can go deep here. Really consider, what do you need? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you solve in your life right now? It may be that in answering this question, you find it's not even a spiritual practice you need. You might need a fitness coach. But it's a very important question to answer. And so I recommend you spend adequate time contemplating this question, what do you need? Step 2 is to contemplate, what's the most appropriate teaching and practice you can find for getting what you need, right? So like I say, if it's that you're overweight, you need a fitness coach, or you at least need to research and educate yourself on fitness principles, nutrition principles, right? If it's one of those more mental, emotional problems, then I strongly recommend some kind of spiritual practice, some kind of wisdom practice. Of course, you may also seek therapy. In fact, I recommend this strongly if your issue is diagnosable. If your issue is at the level where you need intervention, where you need someone else to step in because you're unable to solve it for yourself. And then you would combine that therapeutic process with some kind of more self-reliant process. This is going to be a case for research. You're going to need to go out and research what is the most appropriate teaching and practice to get you what you need. And then step 3 is repeat until enlightened. Just repeat those 2 steps until you have no more problems. Now, you're always going to have worldly problems. There's always going to be problems in your business, for example, if you're an entrepreneur. There's always going to be things to solve. But what I'm talking about is reaching that effortless well-being in yourself to where problems come up and you don't care. You don't care whether you have problems or not. It's all the same to you. And when a problem does arise, you just do what must be done. So I'm talking about dissolving your mental, emotional baggage. That's what we're really talking about here. So that you're free to dedicate all of your mental and emotional resource to problems that help other people. This is what the entrepreneur does. What the modern conscious entrepreneur does, anyway. The business model I run, I call the mutual benefit business model. And there'll be more on that in the future. And I'm able to come to this desk and think about what people need every day because I'm no longer in my own way. I solved that problem of stress. I solved that problem of social anxiety. Now I have enormous energy to dedicate to serving other people, and that in turn serves me. So this is where all this is headed. But first and foremost, I recommend this 3-step inner guru method to become your own guide through this difficult territory of dissolving, of healing your inner blockages, those mental, emotional problems. So I hope this has been useful for you, friend. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below how this goes. What do you notice when you contemplate these questions that I laid out for you? And let me know if you go ahead and choose a practice, if you choose a teaching. Let me know what it is, and let me know how you're getting on with it. I want to hear about it. If you have any questions about this, drop those too. I'm here for you, and I'll see you next time.